Handling the narcissist strategy 1. Strategy 1. Basic understanding of the narcissist brain. Our first step towards mastering the narcissist handling technique is knowing the narcissist brain. Strategy 1. For the sake of convenience, we would name our not so friendly narcissist as Rakshas. So let's begin. Within the brain is a specific structure called as the amygdala. An understanding of the amygdala is crucial to understanding of the narcissist brain. Now, why? Why is it so? It is the amygdala which the narcissists have essentially hacked, altering its neurological function to suit their own purpose. Let me tell you a story to describe the function of the amygdala. Consider a captain of a ship, a captain who sits with a big chair and all TV screens and data scrolling before him. Captain focuses on what is important amongst all the data and then directs someone to deal with it and handle it. The captain may know or not know that there are certain parts of the ship which are to be handled and certain engineering which is required, but still all the data is reported to the captain as the CEO of the company does. Now, as well as the analysis and recommendation are also reported to the captain. Just like your amygdala, the captain decides what is important amongst the data presented and what should be done with it. The captain may or may not be a communication specialist, but he has someone for that. Similarly, he takes decisions for all other specialities, from medicine to security and everything else concerned and related to the plane or the ship. Likewise, the amygdala does not perform the functions of logic and visual processing or auditory sensing or processing of all these information, but all these areas of the brain loosely report these results to the amygdala, and the amygdala scans through all the data even before you are aware of it. The amygdala scans everything which you notice, from the external stimuli to the internal ideas and even some data you don't know being conscious of. So then the amygdala decides and focuses upon it. It even calls up the sensation that what you focus upon you will elicit. Example, anxiety. So the amygdala is basically the captain of the brain, quietly watching everything which flies across the brain's radar. When anxiety is appropriate, it is the amygdala's recognition of the anxiety, and this recognition and this anxiety producing stimulus is also recognized by amygdala, and therefore subsequently it brings an alarm and raises the alarm to the person. It is not until the anxiety producing stimulus is removed from the environment that the amygdala will cease producing panic, at least in normal people. After being placed under a continuous and highly bothersome stimulus, Rakshas was able to discover a cognitive workaround, a sort of neurological short circuit. This short circuit is allowed him to replace any negative perception of reality with a more benign perception of reality that did not elicit any anxious sensations within Rakshas. Rakshas hacked into his amygdala and reprogrammed it to ignore any or deny any stimulus which was likely to elicit panic or anxiety in Rakshas. From that point forward, if any negative stimulus began to appear on one of Rakshas amygdala's big TV screen, his amygdala would immediately turn that screen off and tell itself that such information was obviously incorrect and this information has to be ignored. So, this is the case with Rakshas. Unfortunately, in developing this workaround, Rakshas also sets free his amygdala and himself from the reality of the world around him. Once that cognitive workaround was present, it was destined to become the go to neural pathway for any kind of stimulus. From that moment forward, when Rakshas encounters a stressful stimulus, he confronts it, but rather confronting it, he denies its existence and elicits immediate relief. Over a period of time, Rakshas' brain eventually learned to avoid reality at all costs. It trained itself. As Rakshas' brain begins avoiding reality reflexively, it honestly copes with stress even less often. As his brain becomes less adapted to coping with stress, it was less able to cope with stress. For most people, stress is a good thing, even though it does not feel that way. You encounter stress when something in your environment indicates negativity. And you use that stress to motivate yourself to avoid that negativity. For example, if you have a project to do at your job and it is not done at all, then that unfinished state, that unfinished project will end your career. This is potentially negative forthcoming. Your amygdala will flag that data for significance and send it out to the rest of your brain for a deeper analysis and processing inside it. The rest of your brain will extrapolate out of all the potential consequences and they will feed them back to the amygdala, which will apply the anxiety in response. Now, as you map out potential behaviors to perform, the anxiety will continue whenever you think about any option which will perpetuate that project's unfinished state. That anxiety will drive you to rummage through your brain. Rummage means to move things and make them untidy while you are looking for something important. So, the anxiety will rummage through your brain in search of the cognitive relief, and eventually your brain will find an option. This option will help you finish the job. Once the job is finished, your amygdala will see no negativity forthcoming, and then you will ignore it and come in a complete state of rest or anxiety-free situation. Now, this is for the normal people. The normal people encounter stress when something in their environment is bad. They remove the stress from their life by removing the environmental variable producing the stress and make their environment less and less potentially negative for themselves. As strange as it sounds, for most people, stress used properly can make their life immeasurably better. Unfortunately, Rakshas' brain did not work that way. When Rakshas encountered negativity, it had become so traumatic that he denied it was possible, and thus he never had the ability to structure his life in such a way as to become successful in life, successful at work, successful with friends, in his own family, or even successful as a person. As time went on and on and on, his environment became even more negative, and he retreated even further into his bubble of denial. His hypersensitive amygdala retreating behind even more false reality, even confronting this self inflicting cognitive shortcoming became so stressful, and eventually he learned to tell himself that every bad thing which was happening to him was inflicted by others, although his hatred and bitterness for everyone only grew. That anger was minimal as compared to the other people. And Rakshas needed to start confronting reality, or more negativity would be in his future. Rakshas might have done horrible things. There may be several young people, young women, young men who did not meet a horrible end because Rakshas evil was neurologically constrained by the actions of the crowd on that playground in that case study. What you will hopefully take from this video lesson today is an understanding of how the amygdala's ability to guide focus is related to narcissistic disorder, and how its stimulation affects emotions, and that this can be used by an individual to constrain the narcissist behavior, but only if they know how to do it. Most importantly, narcissists are not narcissists because they want to be. They are narcissists because they have to be. They don't cling to delusions of omnipotence and perfection because they want to. They do so because even to vaguely touch upon any possibility of anything else is to trigger the hypersensitive trigger on an unbearable torment that the narcissist cannot tolerate. This is vital to understanding, my friend, because it indicates that narcissists do not operate from a position of strength. Rather, the desperate Rakshas clings with oil hand to a slippery, untenable lie because of a terror which you can unleash upon him at will, if you know how.